Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Thereafter, some time having passed, the Ashwini Kumara brothers, the heavenly physicians, happened to come to Chavana Muni's ashram. After offering them respectful obeisances, Chavana Muni requested them to give him youthful life, for they were able to do so. Purport. The heavenly physicians, like the Ashwini Kumaras, would give youthful life even to one who was advanced in age. Indeed, great yogis, with their mystic powers, can even bring a dead body back to life if the structure of the body is in order. We've already discussed this in connection with Bali Maharaj's soldiers and their treatment by Shukracharya. Modern medical science has not yet discovered how to bring a dead body back to life, or bring youthful energy to an old body. But from these verses, we can understand that such treatment is possible if one is able to take knowledge from the Vedic information. The Ashwini Kumaras were expert in Ayurveda, as was Dhanvantari. In every department of material science, there is a perfection to be achieved, and to achieve it, one must consult the Vedic literature. The highest perfection is to become a devotee of the Lord. To attain this perfection, one must consult Srimad Bhagavatam, which is understood to be the ripe fruit of the Vedic desire tree, Nigama Kalpataror Galitam Phalam. End of purport. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagna Raghunatham Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhambitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vashadi Gaura Bhakta Brinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. I'd like to begin by begging for the blessings of the Vaishnavas, in particular the senior devotees in the room. There's many devotees, many very much senior to me, so I'd like to really beg for their blessings that I can say something useful for both everyone here as well as myself. So this is very interesting purport. There were a number of topics which Prabhupada touches upon, and one of my favourite aspects of the purport is the end of the purport, where Prabhupada is really glorifying the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he's really saying that the Bhagavatam is the essence of all Vedic literatures. So he's explaining that there are so many areas of knowledge in material science. But if we want to gain any knowledge on anything, then we can turn to the Vedic literatures. And the essence of the Srimad Bhagavatam, of the essence of the Vedic literatures, in turn, is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So then it made me think about how fortunate we are to be able to connect with this wonderful Bhagavad Puran on a daily basis. And so I looked up the Bhagavad Mahatmya, which is from the Padma Puran, and it explains two types of listeners. It explains there are superior listeners and there's inferior listeners. So of the superior listeners, there are 4 categories. The first is compared to the chatka bird. So if anyone knows of the chatka bird in nature, it drinks water just like any other bird, just like any other living entity. But it has a very specific way of gathering water. It won't drink water from a puddle on the ground. It won't drink water from a river or the sea, but it only drinks water which is coming from a rain cloud, which is falling from a rain cloud. So it will only collect water as it's falling from the rain cloud. So this is a chatka bird. So it explains in this Bhagavad Mahatmya that such listeners are very selective as to what they hear. They make sure that they hear this essence of all Vedic literatures. They hear the Srimad Bhagavatam and from the right sources. So we all know that we must hear from Srila Prabhupada because he is the ultimate source of knowledge for us here in ISKCON. The second type of listener is the swan. So we all know about the swan. The swan is able to separate milk from water, take the milk only, and reject the water. So this is likened to the Bhagavatam, which extracts essential topics. There's so much knowledge in the world, so much knowledge within the Vedic literatures, but the Bhagavatam takes essential knowledge in relation to Krishna, and it delivers this knowledge. The third type of listener is the parrot. The parrot hears and repeats. So in this way we maintain fidelity to the parampara. We hear and we repeat what we hear. So to be a parrot is a qualification in our tradition. Whereas parrots are often mimicked or taken the mick of. Parrots is a qualification to be a parrot. And the fourth type of listener is a fish. I found this the most interesting, or the most odd, when I first read it. But it explains that a listener who's like a fish, the fish is described as it just sits there and it just drinks and looks, intent, not blinking, but just hearing, very focused. So in the same way, the fourth type of listener is like a fish. He just drinks the nectar of the Bhagavatam and is with rapt attention just looks at the speaker. So I hope you won't all do that today. You won't be like fish, because that could be quite off-putting for me. But to be like a fish, to listen with rapt attention, with focus. So these are the 4 types of listener that are described. And I was thinking that today I have to be a parrot, because I have to repeat what I have heard from the Vaishnavas. So that is what I will attempt to do. And that is a qualification. And actually the verse that Prabhupada quotes at the end of the purport, it's actually the 3rd verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's a very special verse which glorifies the Bhagavatam. It describes how the Bhagavatam is the mature fruit of the desire tree of the Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadev Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So this Bhagavatam is very special, because it's been coming down in parampara, and it's describing, this verse is describing, this is Shuta Goswami explaining that this Bhagavatam has been, just like a fruit is described, is made sweeter when a parrot pecks at it. Similarly, because the Shukadev Goswami, Shuka is parrot in Sanskrit, Shukadev Goswami is repeating this Bhagavatam and making it sweeter and sweeter. And so sometimes we see that devotees ask a question, that why do we hear from other devotees? Why don't we simply hear from Prabhupada? Or why don't we simply hear from Shukadev Goswami and Shuta Goswami directly? Why do we have to have people in between? Don't they dilute the message? But actually the reality is different. Because not only do we get the realizations of the Acharyas, we get the realizations of Srila Prabhupada, but when we hear in Bhagavatam class, we actually get the realizations of other devotees as well. And so this makes it sweeter and sweeter every step. So in fact, as we flow down the parampara, one could argue that this Bhagavatam becomes even more nectarian, even sweeter. Today may be an exception. So, one of the key topics within this chapter, chapter 3, is Chavana Muni and his desire to be youthful. So there's many other personalities in the Bhagavatam who want to be youthful. Yayati, Maharaj Yayati is one key example. His story is quite interesting. We'll be hearing more about it in the 18th chapter of the same canto, the 9th canto. But it's described that Maharaj Yayati, there was two friends. One was Devyani and the other one was Shamishta. And they were bathing with many, many friends in a lake one day. And as they were coming out of the lake, Shamishta put on the clothes of Devyani. And so they began to fight. And Devyani was very, very rude and abrupt and abusive to Shamishta. And so Shamishta decided to throw her into a well. So Devyani was sitting there in the well, and then along comes Maharaj Yayati, and he picks her up from the well, and then she says, they marry each other. So Devyani and Maharaj Yayati are married. But when Shukracharya, who's the father of Devyani, finds out that his daughter had been thrown into a well, he becomes very upset. So he goes and complains to the father of Shamishta. Is this making sense? So Devyani is the daughter of Shukracharya. He's very angry that his daughter's been thrown into a well, so he goes to Shamishta's father. And he says, what is going on? So everyone's very scared of the Brahmanas, because the Brahmanas can curse. So the father of Shamishta says, okay, I will make my daughter your daughter's maidservant. So Shamishta joins Devyani in the house of Maharaj Yayati. And Maharaj Yayati was obviously, how shall we say, anyway, he came across Shamishta and became attracted, and so they also had sexual union, and they had a child, because Shamishta saw Devyani and saw how happy she was. So then again, Shukracharya, when he heard of this terrible act, he came to Maharaj Yayati, and he's very, very angry with him, and he cursed him, just like angry Brahmanas do. He cursed him to say that he will lose his youthfulness. He will become an old invalid man. And so Yayati was very attached to his youth. And so he prayed to him earnestly. He said, please, have some mercy upon me. So Maharaj Yayati, he was given the boon that, okay, you can, if you negotiate with a young man, you can take his youthfulness. So then Maharaj Yayati approached his son, his youngest son, who was Puru, and he took the youth of his son, Puru, and in that way became youthful himself, and his son became old. So this is the selfish nature of someone who is indulged in sense gratification. So this desire to be youthful is so strong. We also see in the case of Ajamil that although he was so old, he was still acting like a young man. It was 88 when he had his son Narayan. So the story goes that he was 88 years old, he had his son, but because as a youngster he had been devoted to the Lord never forgets anyone's devotional service. Even if we perform the slightest act of devotion in devotional life, the Lord never forgets. So that's something that we should all remember. Even the slightest act of devotional service will never be forgotten. So because Ajamil had performed devotional service, the Lord he inspired a rishi named Lomasha Rishi, and he sent him to the house of Ajamil just as his son was born. And although Ajamil had forgotten everything else, he knew how to respect a rishi, how to respect a sage. And so he gave him a nice place to sit and a glass of water and some kind words. And so Lomasha Rishi said, "You've just had a son." And Ajamil said, "Yes, how did you know?" Of course, he was inspired from within. And so Lomasha Rishi, he named the son Narayan. And so in this way, because Ajamil had performed devotional service, his son was named Narayan. And in this way, because sometimes we ask, well, how is it? Because he was such a sense enjoyer, he'd fallen so low, so many degraded activities, why did he name his son Narayan? So it was actually because a rishi came at an opportune moment and named his son accordingly. So his son was named Narayan, and in that way, at the end of his life, he became perfect. But again, this youthful nature, the desire to be youthful. Also, earlier on in the 8th canto, we were hearing the pastime of the churning of the milk ocean. So the demigods and the demons, they call a truce, and they churn the milk ocean. And so many things come from this churning. There's an elephant, Eravat. There's wonderful jewels, wonderful riches that come from this churning. But at the very end comes something very important. Dhanvantari, who's an incarnation of the Lord. And along with Dhanvantari comes Amrit, nectar. And this nectar can give any individual eternal youthfulness. And this is why everyone was fighting over this nectar. And so the Lord came again in the form of Mohini Murti in order to distribute this nectar, but make sure that it went only to the demigods and not to the demons. But of course we know that there were two demons even, who got in at the very end of the queue, Rahu and Ketu. And the sun god realized that these were actually demons and they weren't demigods. So he chased them away. And so now these demons, Rahu and Ketu, are always chasing the sun god. And whenever they catch him, that is what we know as a solar eclipse. This is what is explained. So everyone is wanting youthfulness, eternal youthfulness. And it's not just the case in our Vedic literatures. We also find that today, and in recent times, everyone wants youthfulness. Everyone wants to be young. Everyone wants to look young. They say, oh, he's young at heart. So when Walt Disney died in the 1930s, he commissioned scientists. He was a millionaire, which in today's terms would probably be a billionaire. Very, very famous the world over. And he commissioned scientists to find the cure for death. He pumped in millions of pounds or millions of dollars for scientists to find the cure to death. And he would be the first one to benefit from this cure. That was the idea. But after some years of the scientists looking for the cure, they failed. And so the family of Walt Disney saw their inheritance dwindling. So they decided to cut off the life support machine, not the life support machine, but he'd been placed in some substance which would preserve his body. So they decided to cut the funding for the scientists and let Walt Disney die. So, well, to just cut the whole experiment. So Walt Disney was looking for eternal youth. Marilyn Monroe, she was one of the most famous actresses of her time. But it's described that when she looked herself in the mirror one day and she saw one white hair, just one white hair, she just locked herself up and never wanted to be seen again. So attached. And then this youthfulness is even the topic of fairy tales. Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. I'm sure many of you will have watched the cartoons when you were young. So he's this young boy, 12, 13 years old, who flies around and plays with fairies and other things, and is just happy and young. So it's a thing of fairy tales. People write about it, people think about always being youthful. So similarly, Chavana Muni here wants to be youthful. But actually the Bhagavad Gita describes that Janam Mrityu Jaravyadi Dukha Doshanu Darshanam. No one can get away from these problems of birth, old age, disease and death. They're fundamental problems of life. No matter how hard we try, no matter how many scientists try to find the cure to death, no one will find the cure to death. It's just not possible. So birth, old age, disease and death, no one can get away from. But in our Vedic tradition, there is a cure to these things, at least to some degree. Ultimately it's temporary because everyone will die. But it's described here in the purport that the Ashwini Kumaras, they can give the cure, at least to some degree, to death. But they use subtle sciences. Everything in our world today is so gross. Everything is in your face. Everything is now. And so when we talk about subtle sciences, for example, warfare is carried out through mantra. Medicine is carried out through mantra. This is subtle science. So when we talk about these things, the average person today and the scientists, they dismiss such proposals. They think that they don't actually exist. But it's actually very interesting. The ideology behind it is, if I see it, then I believe it. So even when we talk about God, they say, well, if I see it, then I believe it. If I see God, if He exists, then show me. But it's actually a very narrow idea. Because if we really think about it, if we take aeroplanes, for example, it was only in the early 1900s that aeroplanes actually began to be something which was a possibility. So if you talk to someone in 1850, for example, and you said to them that in 50 years' time, there will be an object which will fly through the sky. And in 100 years' time, there will be millions of people every year flying through the sky, going from one country to another. You'll be able to get from the UK to India to Delhi in 8.5 hours if you're flying Virgin. People would have thought you're mad. It's an absolutely ludicrous idea. But now every year, around 75 million passengers go through Heathrow Airport. Huge numbers. So if you really think about it, this idea that, okay, if I see it, then I believe it, is very narrow. If you take microchips, gigabytes and gigabytes of information enclosed in one small object. Again, if you tell someone 50 years ago that you'd be able to do this, they would think that you're mad. So when we go to the history, the Puranas, like the Bhagavad Puran, and it describes people like, or personalities like Varahadev, who is described that he was standing in the Garbhodaka ocean. So the universe is half full of the perspiration of Mahavishnu, and that is known as the Garbhodaka ocean. And it's described that Varahadev was standing knee-deep in this Garbhodaka ocean. So not even half of him was covered by this ocean. He was so huge. We also find descriptions of Lord Shiva in the 4th canto sitting under a banyan tree. And this banyan tree is 800 miles high and 600 miles wide. Absolutely huge. So when people see, and sometimes even when devotees see these descriptions, they wonder, is this really true? Can this be true? Or is it just myth? So very often, I remember the RE textbooks when I was at school, it talked about the mythology of the Vedic literatures. This word mythology is used so often, and even the average Hindu today refers to it as mythology. But why do we limit our experience? Why do we limit reality based on simply our experience? That's really the question. Our experience is so limited, as the examples of the aeroplane and the microchip exhibit. So why do we say that this is all that's possible? Because I can see it. What I can see is actually so limited. So we have to have faith in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam has to be our vanguard, our Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki, Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshan Hanuman ki, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki. So it's the Bhagavatam which is a source of knowledge, and scientists may corroborate what the Bhagavatam says. Scientists may find what the Bhagavatam says. They may make discoveries, but the Bhagavatam is our main source of knowledge. And the scientists may find things which connect, which agree with the Bhagavatam. They may not, but for us, the Bhagavatam is what really makes sense. The Bhagavatam is really our source and what we instill our faith in. Because ultimately, it's described that faith and knowledge are two key measures of a devotee. Faith and knowledge. So when we measure a Kanishta Adhikari, a Madhyama Adhikari, or an Uttama Adhikari, they're measured on the basis of faith and knowledge. So the degree to which our faith is there in the holy name, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, deity worship, in the practices of Krishna consciousness, and the degree to which we have knowledge of these processes, to that degree it's described that we are eligible to make advancement in devotional service. So if we really look at it, why should we really believe in the Bhagavatam? And there are many reasons. Because if we look at the non-devotee argument, it's simply, well, this cannot be true, because I haven't seen it, and therefore these proposals of Varahadev, of Lord Shiva's banyan tree, how can they be true? Because I haven't seen it. But the devotee's argument is that this is possible. Because if you look at the people, the personalities within these literatures, they're such sophisticated individuals. If you look at the language in which this Bhagavatam is written, it's written in Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is known as the mother of all languages. Many linguists have confirmed this. They see how complex a language is, how sophisticated it is. 12 years to simply learn the language. You see the culture and the etiquettes amongst individuals, which this Bhagavatam and which the Vedic literatures propose, is so nuanced, so detailed, so much love, care and attention. It's so very sophisticated. You see the way people think, the way people talk, the way people live is again so very sophisticated. So the logic and the philosophy, the theology of the Bhagavatam is so advanced and so demanding for one to really engage with and get into. The Bhagavatam proposes its followers to be celibate for their entire lives. It proposes complete renunciation from the world and abstinence from meat. It encourages people to live such high ideals. So all of these things point to the Bhagavatam not being some ordinary literature, because the people who are actually writing these literatures, who are following these literatures and passing down the knowledge in parampara, have such great integrity and are so sophisticated as individuals. So there's so many reasons for us to really believe in the Bhagavatam and really place our faith in it. And then we see Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada left his native India and went over to the West in order to give the Srimad Bhagavatam. This was his mission. So before he had left India, he'd written up a little pamphlet. And at the front of the pamphlet, he hadn't even finished the Bhagavatam. He had only written the canto in 3 volumes. But he had written that he's coming to the West in order to deliver the Srimad Bhagavatam in 60 volumes, in order to bring about a revolution in the world, brought to you by Scindia ships, because he was travelling on the Jaladuta, which was run by Scindia ships, shipping company. So this was Prabhupada's mission, to bring the Srimad Bhagavatam to the world. And we see that so many great personalities are attracted to the Bhagavatam. In the 7th chapter of the 1st canto is described Atma Ramas Chamunayo Nirgrantha Api Urukrume Kurvanti Ahetukim Bhaktim Itham Bhutam Gunohari. Sutta Goswami describes, it's a discussion of Shukadev Goswami, because we all know that he was in his mother's womb for 16 years. Because he didn't want to come out of his mother's womb, because he didn't want to come into the material realm where Maya is so strong. So he wanted to stay within that relative shelter. But eventually, after 16 years, when he came out, he got up and walked straight out. So imagine you have a child, and the moment you have him, he just gets up and walks straight out. So this is what Shukadev Goswami did. But obviously, his father, he chased him and asked him to come back, but he wasn't interested. But he only came back when his father promised him to tell him the pastimes of Lord Krishna. So Shukadev Goswami was a liberated soul, it's described. He was an impersonalist, but he was a liberated soul. And liberated souls are known as Atma Ramas. They are fully self-satisfied. They don't need anything. But this verse explains that even the Atma Ramas, they are interested in knowing the pastimes, the name, form, qualities, and activities of the Lord, of Lord Krishna. So this is why Shukadev Goswami, he returned to hear the pastimes of the Lord. He was interested, and in this way, by hearing the pastimes of Lord Krishna, he too became a personalist through the association of his father. And so it's incumbent on us to also take on this responsibility to distribute the Srimad Bhagavatam and Vedic and literatures in pursuance of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we go out, and at the moment we have a glut of Bhagavatams in the warehouse. So there's plenty of Bhagavatams to distribute. And so our mission is to distribute the Srimad Bhagavatam to as many people as possible. Of course, the Bhagavatam is non-different to Krishna. It's non-different to Krishna. So it's very much possible for the Bhagavatam to just get up and walk into people's homes. But in order to engage us all in this mission of distributing books, the Srimad Bhagavatam has decided not to do that. It's decided to engage all of us devotees in its distribution. And therefore this is our mission. I was with Sutta Prabhu last night, and he's creating a video to promote Sankirtan. So for the past few months they've been, as I think we all know, on a tour, travelling around the country. And most recently they were in Scandinavia, distributing Prabhupada's books, doing Harinams and Rath Yatras. A very inspirational tour. So along with Nikhil Prabhu, they're producing a video to promote this tour. And he was playing a lecture, just a small excerpt of a very famous lecture. And Prabhupada is saying that this Bhagavatam is so amazing. It's so nice, Prabhupada says, that even if someone reads one shloka, then their life will change. They will become perfect. And then Prabhupada says, not just one shloka, one word. Even if someone reads one word, then their life will be changed. So how powerful this Bhagavatam is. So sometimes distributors, they get mental. We have this phrase in ISKCON, getting mental. And they think, well, will this person really read the book? You know, they don't really seem like much of a reader. And they think, well, I distributed 20 books today, but maybe 19 of them won't even be read. But it's not even a problem. Because we were in Slough just on Saturday, and we were discussing that just being on the streets means success. Just going out and stepping onto the street equals success. Because we're going out there and we're putting ourselves on the line for the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that within itself is success, because we're pleasing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And what is the mission of Sankirtan? It's not to distribute hundreds and thousands of books necessarily, but it's simply to please the Acharyas and to please Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so that is perfection. And so when we go out, we try to give people the Srimad Bhagavatam. And some people will take and some people won't take. But simply by seeing the devotees, simply by seeing the Bhagavatam, simply by coming into the energy field of these transcendental literatures, people are becoming purified. People are gaining sukriti. So it's such a powerful activity. There's no activity like it. So by distributing this Bhagavatam, we get the blessings of Gauranitai. And in that way, it's an essential aspect of sadhana. So we chant our rounds, we read the books, we hear lectures, and then we preach, and we distribute the Bhagavatam. And in that way we really get the blessings of the Acharyas, of Shukadev Goswami, of Srila Prabhupada, and everyone, because they're all watching and they're all waiting to see the transcendental adventures of the book distributors and the devotees doing Harinam and the devotees distributing Prasad and everyone who's supporting them. So this is the transcendental nature of the preaching movement. So I think I'll stop there. Any comments, corrections?